Hello there, I'm Jan Porter, and today I'm doing a spot of swim feeder fishing on the River Avon at Twyford Farm in Warwickshire. I've heard there's some good chub pegs on the island. Not that I need reminding, I've drawn there enough times myself. I'll see you down there. Here we are on peg 8 on the island. It's an area I know very well, having fished a lot of these pegs in open competitions over the last 3 or 4 years. In fact, I've drawn them so many times they started calling me Robinson Crusoe around here. It's a beautiful day, we've got a nice bit of ripple on the water, and I think this is going to help the fishing as well. It's a beautiful place to fish if you've never had the pleasure to come down here. It's surrounded by trees, it's a really nice scenic place. There's a lot of fish here too, and I'm hoping to get amongst them later on. Before I do that, I'd like to talk about the swim feeder and what's happened to the swim feeder, or in fishing terms, over the last 10 years. It's gone a long way, and now I would say that it's the most popular method used by anglers on both open matches and pleasure fishing. That's excluding your carp and pike fishermen, of course. The first feeders that we saw on the Trent circuit in the late 70s were huge things like this. This is a block end feeder, quite simply because both ends are blocked off. You can see the holes that are punched in the side of it. This allows the maggots, or whatever you're using in the feeder, to escape and trickle past the hook length. It's a perfect way of fishing. I can't think of any better way of presenting bait at distance than the swim feeder. But it's very large, and if you compare it to one that you use today on the circuit, especially in match fishing on harder venues, you'll find things have changed quite a lot. This one here is a small Drennan. It's about a 1/4 ounce load on it, and you might use one of them to catch chub, dace, even bream during a competition. As you can see, the volume is decreased dramatically. You'll probably only get 20 maggots in that, whereas if you use that in 5 hours of fishing, you could easily get through 5 or 6 pints and more. Let's have a look at some more feeders. There's such a wide variety of feeders on the market today, it's difficult to know where to start. But as I've mentioned, the big ones were the first ones we saw on the Trent. The block ends were used by the 7 anglers, and in particular the Kidderminster lads. They came on the Trent in the late 70s and early 80s and really cleaned up in the open matches. They carry a lot of bait, and I think really that was the key to the success. Being a river that responded to heavy feeding, the Trent in particular lapped up these big feeders, and you could easily get through 6 pints of bait in a 5-hour match. The Kidderminster lads were hotly tipped to win the 1981 Division 1 National on the Trent. But fortunately for me, being a Nottingham local, the Notts Federation lads got their act together and paralysed it on the float. That's not to say that the Kidderminster lads did badly. They did exceptionally well in practices, and I can remember I fished for Notts anglers and we really thought they were going to be a force to be reckoned with. On the day they won quite a few sections, as it turned out. It took a long time for us to get used to the feeder on the Trent, but that's what we had to do, otherwise we'd fall by the wayside as match anglers. But these large feeders certainly paved the way for even greater things. Colin Walton was one of the first anglers to recognise the value of swim feeder fishing on the Trent, and he really capitalised on it. He had a run of 5 years when he was almost invincible. He didn't use the block end feeder, he used an open end feeder with castor and groundbait and hemp seed, but I'll talk about that later on. Block end feeder fishing is probably one of the easiest ways to fish. It doesn't require any know-how on the groundbait consistency. All you do is fill it with maggots or castors and hemp and chuck it into the river. The bait then comes out of these little holes in the side, and the hook length will be where it is, and the fish take it readily as if it was one of the loose offerings. It's a particularly good method even to this day. we've had to change a little bit. The fish got very weary to feeder fishing, and eventually I had to fish a lot smaller feeders, and now we've ended up with a nice balance on a feeder that size. That's called a Thamesley small feeder, and that's most commonly used on the River Trent. I'll be using one of these later on today during the video, because being summer we should expect quite a lot of fish knocking about, and I think the volume of bait that will put out will be just about right. The most important thing when you're fishing the feeder is to get the actual leading on the side of the feeder right for the flow that you're fishing. On the River Trent you might use up to 2 ounces, and these particular straps are called, up our neck of the woods, dead cows. You can see why they look like a dead cow. They don't moo either, but that's beside the point. And these fit quite neatly into the side holes on the Thamesley, and they're already angled round, radiused, to accommodate the side of the swim feeder itself. And they have a nice snug fitting feeder strap for when you're fishing pegs that are flowing quite hard. On other occasions where you're fishing a venue or a stretchy river that's not quite as fast, you might decide to use these little tiny ones. Ray Benton initially brought these out on the market, maybe 10 years ago now, and I prefer to use these sort. They fit nice and snugly onto the feeder. I can find one. This is a little tiny one that I've cut down, and they just nick into the side holes, same as the dead cows, and there you've got it. Now you can get 3 or 4 different sizes in these, and what I do on the day I decide to fish is I work it around the weight until I just get the feeder holding the bottom. The reasons are, you get a better bite indication if that's just sort of hanging in there. It wants to move a little bit, and a method to catch a lot of fish is by just tweaking the line on the rod and allowing that to bounce through. This makes the fish go for the moving maggot. Some of the other feeders that I've got in here have been customised. This particular one's a small Drennan. I might use this on the Avon in winter time when bites are at a premium. It's got a little piece of gum in between it that snaps it together, and you feed the maggots in there and then just clip it together, and it's attached onto your line, and that's a nice little feeder for fishing when it's harder. This is a commercially designed feeder for flowing rivers, and it's made by Peter Drennan. A lot of thought's gone into this one. It's got nice streamlined sides allowing the water to flow over the top, but it's got a flat base which sits on the bed of the river and stops it rolling like one of the round ones might do. If I can find one. Like that. Very, very popular with the pleasure anglers. And I should know, I used to have a retail shop, and these go like hot cakes in summer. Just before I go on to my rods, I'll show you about what we do with some of the feeders. There's a little tiny link that I fit onto my feeders, which is made out of high power gum. Originally developed for fly fishing, I believe. It's got a small Indian love bead on there, and that fits onto the line. Don't worry about that, I'll talk about that later. This clips underneath the lead of the feeder, but before it does that it goes through the cap, so that retains the cap onto the feeder. It can't blow up your line like some of them do. But even better than that, it means that the actual bead comes through the centre of the feeder, and this is more streamlined through bringing it back in the water. Up until 2 seasons ago I used to use it on the side like probably most of you do, but I've found since putting it through the middle, the feeder comes a lot better through the water. You'll also notice on this particular one, it's been blackened off. Now there is a train of thought that some fish know the colour of swim feeders and it affects the fishing. So we just got a marker pen and blacked it all out. Another feature of this feeder is the holes. You might tell that they're a little bit bigger than the standard ones, and all we do for this is to get a pair of scissors or pliers and just work the holes like that to open them up. The reason why we do this is on some of the faster waters we want the bait to come out quickly. If the maggots are stuck in the feeder for a long period of time, the whole method doesn't work properly. Right, that's looked at feeders. Now let's have a look at some rods. Let's put these down here out of the way. The first rod I want to have a look at is a fibre tube float rod that was originally 12 foot in length. We used to use these all the time before carbon came out, and what I've done is I've chopped about 8 to 10 inches off the end of it, and with the tip in it it's about 11 foot 6 long now. Before I look at this rod that I've got, let's have a look at the tip that I made. When the Kidderminster lads came on the Trent, they were using more or less glorified carp rods. Such was the strength of the method, you didn't really need any sensitive bite indication. And out of that, I made this tip, which is a very, very stiff quiver tip that I've spliced into the end of the top section. The bites were very, very ferocious, and you'd be looking for drop back bites, which need no discussion really. But you could get even tiny bites off gudgeon and small skimmer bream on this type of tip. I made this rod, I would say, about 1980, and I won a lot of money using it. Things have moved on a little bit since then. I'll show you the end of the rod I'm using today. Get onto it. Incidentally, I'm sorry about the noise. There's some kind of lorry rally behind us. I don't know what's occurring exactly. Hopefully they'll go away in a bit. Now this tip is much finer. It shows those very shy bites up, and in the winter time, when the fish are very finicky, this is the kind of tip you might need. Because we're looking for chub and a lot of dace today, I'm going to use this finer tip. It's got a nice mellow action, and this will punch your feeder out 40 yards no problem. A lot of people tend to use carbon rods these days, but I still use this rod, and it's very, very forgiving on light hook lengths such as pound and 12-ounce bottoms. And you can imagine, when you're catching fish to 3 pound on a 12-ounce or a pound bottom, you need the rod to take a little bit of the punishment. In my opinion, some of the rods on the market today are a little bit too stiff for that kind of work. Let's have a look at the reel. This reel is a carp reel. Now, I know they used to use carp rods, but in my opinion, this is the best type of reel for feeder fishing. This reel is a very wide spool, which is an added bonus for casting long distances. Sometimes when I fish on the Trent, on stretches like Hoveringham and Caythorpe, you need to get right over on the other side of the river, and so having a wide spool makes this much easier. It's a lightweight reel despite its size being made out of graphite, and you'll probably notice on the back there's a large button. This is called a rear drag. Some anglers use the rear drag to play the fish, as it allows the spool to let the line out. Normally it does anyway, like that. I tend to tighten it right up, and when I do catch a fish, I play the fish on the reel itself. If the fish wants to go out, I play it out on the reel, and then obviously wind it in. The line I've got on today is 4 pound Maxima, and that's a good general size line to use. Maxima is a very strong, durable line with a lot of stretch in it, and I find it perfect for all my feeder work. The importance of diameters is not always recognised by anglers. In the summer months, when the rivers are very low, you can get away with bigger diameters, and I'd probably use 6 pound when I'm fishing on a big chub. The bigger the diameter of the line, the more resistance you get on the river and the flow, and so you need more lead on your feeder. I try and get the balance just right, but in the main 4 pound is the optimum size. Let's have a look at another rod. This next rod I'm looking at now is a slightly smaller rod, and it's certainly a lot lighter. When I say lighter, it's a softer rod. I use this one for very small feeders and also for link ledgering. It's a 3-piece rod and it's got a little bit of glass in it, but in the main it's carbon. If I show you the tip, you'll see something that's a little bit different from the other rod I've just talked about. And get this off. It's got what we call a push-on tip. That means, quite simply, you just push it on. And I've got an array of tips that I can change. The biggest problem with quiver tips is sometimes you get a wrap round on the tip, which causes it to snap off. Now on the traditional splice tip rods, if this occurs, then that means the rod becomes redundant, you can't use it no more. If I do lose the tip on this particular rod, what I do is take that top tip out and push another one on. Again, it's got a nice forgiving action, and the top of this rod is made out of a fly blank. I use it also on still waters for swim feeder fishing and for bomb fishing. It's got a cork handle. I failed to mention on the other one, it's just got a clip handle on it. Now that's not important at all. The means of putting the reel on is subject to personal taste. But the positioning of the reel is quite important. If I'm fishing a little chuck or a short chuck, then I'll position the reel sort of anywhere down the butt where it's comfortable. If I'm fishing the rod in front of me like this, I like to have the reel a little bit further down the handle. But for a big chuck, on the rod I'm going to show you next, I tend to have the reel a little bit further up the rod. And this is because I'm going to use a double-handed cast to cast the feeder out. You need to do this to get the distance. This is a smaller reel, again a graphite reel, but the line I've got on here is only 2 or 2.5 pound. Maxima again, and I find it the best line for this kind of work. Let's look at the final rod. Now this brute here, although it's got no reel on it, is sort of state-of-the-art feeder fishing as it is today. It's a 13-foot, well it's 11-13 actually, because it breaks down into 2 sections. But it's a 13-foot rod for all intents and purposes. Again with a push-in tip on the end of it, which will pop out if I do get into any problems. I can change that if I crack off on the top section, which is very, very rare. That just pushes neatly into there, and I've got 3 or 4 replacements for that. As you can see on this rod, it's got a weave around it, which strengthens the blank up tremendously. It's a carbon rod with a little bit of glass built in. You can't use 100% carbon, else the rods become too brittle. Also, on this rod, you'll see it's got a long handle, which again I like for the big chuck for punching a feeder out. Right, let's have a look at rod rests. It's only a small point, but a lot of anglers seem to get confused over where and how to position the rod rest for feeder fishing. This is a standard extending bank stick, and you notice on the end of it, it's got a loop feeder rest in it. This just screws into the end on a standard thread, and it moves through quite a few angles. As you tighten the bank stick up, this locks it into position and makes it very, very stable. The other nice thing about this type of rod rest is there's no line traps to get your line caught. Before, in the olden days, the rod rests that were available on the market, it was terrible. You used to get your line caught underneath, get a bite, strike, crack off. Not so with this one. This is perfect for feeder fishing. Not too big, although the 7 lads use very big rod rest tops, but it's just right for feeder fishing on the rivers. Now when you position the rod rest, it depends on which way the flow's going. Today it's going left to right, albeit very slowly, and so I'm going to position my rod rest like that. This means I can see the rod bending towards the right hand side, which will give me the best form of indication. If the river was flowing from right to left, then I'd position my rod rest so. You'll notice that the rod rest is very high up in the air. This is to keep the rod at an angle of about 45 degrees, again to keep the line out of the water. The less line resistance, and I must stress this, the less lead you need to put on the feeder and the better chance you've got of bite indication. In the winter time, when you're fishing the link ledger or a very, very small feeder, you can put the rod rest low down in front of you, almost like bream fishing on a still water, and just plop the rod in front of you and fish it in a traditional way. So that's looked at rod rests. Now we're going to have a look at some bait. The bait I'm going to be using today is maggots. Now it's very important when you're using maggots to make sure you get the most top quality bait that's available. I'm fortunate in that respect. I do get sponsored for a certain amount of bait. These maggots are a couple of days old now, but if I'm fishing a competition I like them to get as fresh as possible, and normally I collect them on the morning of the match. These are white maggots, but you can use any colour you like for swim feeder fishing. It's the effect of the maggots coming out of the swim feeder that causes it to be such a good method. I've got a little bit of additive in here. Some people tend to use a curry-based powder called turmeric, and I use that a lot on the Trent. But these are natural whites with a few coloured maggots in there. That's a disco there, the orange one, and that's a red. You can tell when the chub are in your peg because they'll be coughing up one or two of these, and I use them as target bait. Sometimes I have a couple of the discos on when I want to catch the chub, or sometimes I have a couple of reds, or a red and a disco, or a red and a white. It pays to ring the changes in this situation. I mentioned additives. This particular one is one that's just come out, and you can, if you can't guess who it's made by, it's by a chap called Marcel, and he's from Belgium, and that's about all I'm going to say on it. It's a lovely smelling additive. It's got some kind of licorice or aniseed smelling to it. And I've been using this season. It's intended for roach, but it seems to work on all kinds of fish. It's like bran in consistency, and it really adds a nice flavour to them maggots for the fish. People ask me whether maggots and additives work together. I think it's psychological to a certain extent, but it does help me with my confidence in match fishing. Let's put them down. You've probably noticed I've got a bowl of groundbait knocked up here. Well, I wouldn't usually use groundbait on this particular peg, but if I'm fishing any river, not just here, the Trent or the Severn, I've always got some groundbait knocked up beside me, in case it's a fluke day and the bream have a show. In this groundbait, I fish casters, and maybe a little bit of hemp as well. Just mix it in there. And this is a very light mix. It's Expo and Castor because it's a very slow moving river. If I want to fish on a river where there's a lot more pace, use something like this one. It's called Turbo. It's a very, very cloggy groundbait, and that will get the groundbait down to the bottom quickly and hold it there without moving it out of your swim. A few years ago, I used to fish by putting 6 balls of groundbait in my peg at the start of the match. That's when the caster revolution was there. And the reason I did this was to make sure that I got a good amount of groundbait out in the middle of the river. I might not fish it at all during the course of the match, depending on how the float was working. But at any time, I'd look around me from peg to peg and see if there are any indications of people catching on the caster and groundbait feeder. As soon as I saw these indications, I'd be straight out on the swim feeder and the fish would be waiting there. This won me a lot of matches. And now the Trent's moving back into caster and groundbait, I don't see any reason why it shouldn't work. In essence, you've got to make it sticky, get to the bottom and keep the fish there. Well, that's talked about the groundbait. It's gone a little bit dry now. I mixed it up earlier on. If I want to dampen it off, just use a sponge and just sprinkle it on. And that will wet it up. I doubt very much I'm going to use it today, but if I do happen to get a bream or two, then I'll start putting a little bit in. Right, before we get down to the actual fishing, the question I've been asked most, and all the time I've been fishing, is how to attach the swim feeder onto the main line. Now this applies to both open end feeder and block end feeder, and it's quite straightforward. There's other ways of attaching feeders, but this one suits me best. It doesn't tangle up, and I find that it's the best way to do it, and also the simplest. Let's have a look. I've got a spooler line here. It's not what I'll be using. It's about 8 pound breaking strain, just so you can see exactly what's happening. I'm choosing the same feeder that I'm going to use today, and you'll notice that I've removed the little nylon loop that was attached to it when I bought it. This is the little gum link that I talked about previously, and that starts off by slotting through the cap, like so. So that's through the cap, but it won't go right through because the bead's stopping it. It's just a case of, well, not normally this difficult, but just putting that gum underneath the feeder and clamping it down with the lead on the side of the feeder. There we have the cap retained with a gum link. Let's get that out of the way. So that one's ready to go. I don't want any extra lead on it because the water's very, very slowly moving. And quite simply what we do is to take the line, which is representing the main line on coming from your reel on your rod, and thread it through the bead, like so. And then that is hanging on a twin piece of line. Sweat the line slightly and then make one loop. You can just do a normal single loop in that and then pull it nice and tight. And there you've got the feeder on one loop. It's quite free to move up and down. And I drop the feeder back towards the rod top so it's hanging on the knot I've just made, and I'm going to make another loop in the middle of it. So there we've got 2 loops. That stops the feeder sliding back down towards the rod tip every time you wind in, and that prevents it from rubbing on to your hook length, which can be as fine as 12 ounce. When you've got additional feeder leads on there, it can abrade your line and cause a weakness, and that's not acceptable. Just to round it off, I put another little loop inside the second loop, and that stiffens the whole thing up and hangs it off like a little boom when you're getting sea fishing. So there's the feeder, there's it set up on the loop, and it works 2 ways. When you get very fine bites, the hook pulls through that little bead and you get an indication on your tip. On a savage bite, especially when using a heavily loaded feeder, the fish take the line through the bead and hook themselves, almost like a bolt rig in carp fishing. Quite simple really, and not all that difficult to do. The beauty about the gum link on it is the fact that it doesn't tangle up, and I very, very rarely get tangles. People like using swivels and all these fancy gadgets on the end of it, but to me that is the best way to do it. Now let's get down to some fishing. Well, here we are down on the river's edge. I've moved all my equipment from off the landing stage. I like to get nice and comfortable, preferably with the water above my knee level. It just being tall like I am, it helps me get into the frame of things. The weather's changed dramatically. From being quite sunny, it's turned overcast. We've had quite a bit of rain in the last 10 minutes or so, and we might get a bit more, but I don't think it'll bother the fish too much. Before we get down to the fishing, I just want to talk briefly about the setup of my equipment, and this is most important for me in mouth fishing. The essence of it is to get everything to hand, and as you can see, I've got all the bait that I'll be requiring today on my right hand side in one of the Peter Drennan bait waiters. They're not very expensive and they're invaluable for my fishing. Here I've got cooked hemp seed, which I may well use if I'm getting problems with dace, as well as a few casters and the maggots that I mentioned earlier, which are a mixture of whites, discos and a few reds in. They've already taken the hue off this additive that I've put in earlier, and I think the additive will form a cloud as the feeder hits the water, attracting fish towards the hook bait. The keep net is positioned in front of me, and I'll be swinging my fish straight to hand. If they're small ones, I can drop them in. If I want to net the fish, I've got the keep net, the landing net rather, immediately to my left. I can just reach out, pan the fish straight up, and then plop the fish in the water. It's so important to have everything nearby. I've seen so many anglers reaching for this and for that, and it must take a lot of the time out of the fishing. What you want to do is get the bait in the river as often as possible, the hook bait that is. On the left hand side I've got another waiter, and this contains the ground bait that I mixed up earlier. I don't think I'm going to be using this today, and I may well have to wet it, it's dried out again. But if I do get problems with smaller fish, it's sometimes an idea to introduce a bit of ground bait, and that preoccupies them and lets the bigger fish come in. On the top of that I've got a range of feeders, some block ends just in case I am unfortunate enough to lose one or two during the day's fishing, and some variations with different leads on, and I've even brought down to the bank outside some open end feeders. I might try that later on. So that's there whenever I need it. But most importantly is the hooks to nylon. I know a lot of anglers tie the hooks up on the bank, but I prefer to have all mine tied up before I get to the match. And as you can see, there's a real wedge of hooks in here, ranging from 26s to 8-ounce bottoms for canal work, right the way through to size 4s for luncheon meat fishing. You just never know which situation you could come across, and so I like to have everyone in there. But for today, taking the conditions as they are and noticing there's a lot of days topping, I think I'm going to be fishing a size 20 to start with, a fine wire hook. It'll be a B520 whisker barb made by Camasan, and I'm going to take a chance and start on a pound bottom. This will indicate to me whether the fish are feeding or not. If they're really having a go, I can easily take another hook out the wallet and change it to a 20s and 1/7, and by that time I should have a few chub bites, and then I'll be able to see which way to go. If the chub are really going strong, I might even step up to a size 16 and a 2.5 pound bottoms, but we've got to wait a little bit later on to find that out. So there's all the hooks ready to go. I'll just cover them up in case it rains a bit more, and that's about it. The only other thing I would say, I mentioned earlier about positioning the rod rest, and this is very important when you are fishing the feeder. The flow is from the left to the right hand side, and so I've got my rod at an angle of about 45 degrees from me and slightly to the left, so that the tip, when the line bows in the water, is going that way. I could alternatively fish it slightly downstream, but the same angle, so I could watch the tip that way. But this is very comfortable for me. The rod rest here is the one that we talked about, but I've added onto it quite a useful little gadget, and this is made by Aquarians, and I've only just seen these come out on the market. I know the Seven lads have been using similar kind of attachments for a great many years, but this one at about £5 represents good value for money, and you just locate the rod butt in there. Okay, let's get some fishing done. I'll start off with double disco maggot on. If there is a chub lurking about, they normally take it in the first few casts on the feeder. They seem to dive straight at it. Okay, just fill the Swimfeeder up with a bit of bait. Snap the cap on and ready to go. Now, one of the most important things when you're feeder fishing is to try and get your cast relatively accurate every time. And it's quite simple. All you do is get the rod, look at the feeder as it's going behind you, make sure there's no grass or anything growing in the back of you, and it's a nice, easy sweep. Now, if you keep it in that attitude all the time, then you'll find that the feeder always goes in the same line, and you want to keep it as tightly grouped together as you can and get them fish coming in. Now, there's nothing happening here immediately. I suppose it's asking a bit too much to catch a chub first chub. You've probably heard a few aeroplanes knocking about. I think there must be an RAF base pretty local. Let's give this a bit of a tweak. Yeah, they make a hell of a racket. I can remember one match I fished at Shelford on the Swimfeeder, and this is perfect for watching aircraft, and they had an air display on the other side, and there was Vulcans and Lancaster bombers. It was a really enjoyable day. Never had a bite, but the air display was fun. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep that feeder going in and out quite regular intervals, because I want to get some bait into the peg, and by the feeder in the water and the maggots coming out, we should sooner or later start getting a few fish. You can be quite busy fishing the feeder, it's surprising. Even on a small Thamesley block end like this, you can use a bit of bait in a 5-hour competition. Get through anything up to 4 pints, that's if the fish are really going well. The more bites you get, obviously the more you've got to fill the feeder. I just had a bit of a wrap then. I think it was a small fish. Yeah, it gets really busy if you're on days. I mean, the maggot's not been marked, but I might have been pecking at the feeder. You tend to do that, start hitting the bait straight on the feeder, especially when they're really ravenous. And I didn't tell you about the hook length, but I've started off with about an 18-inch hook length. And that's generally what I use as a rule. This can vary from 18 inches to 6 foot on very difficult venues or in winter time, and as short as 4 inch. I've caught on the Trent fishing a 4-inch hook length on very strong terminal tackle, 3 and 4 pound bottoms, and it doesn't seem to bother the chub one bit. In fact, I've experimented over the last 10 years on feeder fishing, and I've found that even with no bait on the hook, you get these little tiny tremors and rattles as the fish are knocking the bait about, trying to get it out of the feeder. Almost as if they're trying to suck it out the holes. But, nice, steady action. Looking where it is all the time. And just plopping it in there. Got no lead on this feeder. The river's very, very low and it's not hardly moving at all, but I'm getting bites now, little tremors. As soon as it hits the water, it's not very deep over there. I would think it's only about 4 or 5 foot. I'm going to just shorten the hook length by about 6 inches and see if that makes any difference. Because I'm getting bites and they're not marking the bait. Might be an idea actually to chuck it out without any bait on, just see if they are pecking at the feeder. I'm just going to take a little bit off this hook length. I think the fish are hitting the feeder. Definitely, I've had marked maggots. They could be dace, but they could be chub. So let's just take that to about a foot, being careful to put the line somewhere where it's not going to get in the way of the wildlife. Tie my hook lengths on with a half blood knot. Some people use a double loop method. Either are acceptable. I've just found that this seems to be a little bit stronger. A bit of spit on the line just to help it tie in there. Mag it on and away we go again. You can see that's reduced to about a foot and a bit now. Putting a disco on. I've got a lot of confidence in these disco maggots. Caught me a lot of bonus fish in matches. Although they did try and ban them down here at one stage. Alright, here we go. And just cast that feeder a little bit closer to them trees on the island. If there is any chub knocking about, that's where they'll be hanging about. And this is a chub. And I'll fight well. Always take it a little bit steady. When I first took it, a short hook length with a palm bottom, and you never notice. And you don't know the peg. Every peg's different. There could be snags in it, and as soon as them chubs see a snag, they're straight in it. It's a decent fish. It's like a dead weight. And this is quite a dangerous bit here because there could be some snags or anything down this side. Give him a bit of stick, but not too much. See how that rod's just soaking all that pressure up. Very soft. Here he comes. Oh, it's a good fish. It's about £1.5, £2. Oh, that's a good start. Just coincided with the rain coming down. Still, if it's raining and I'm catching, I'm not too disappointed. Put the landing net back for the next one. I need a disgorger on this, I think. Keep the disgorger behind me here. That's straight out. There we are. That's a nice clean fish. Let's put him in the net. Hope we can get some of his mates. Got this towel. I didn't mention it earlier. We've got this towel wrapped around me. It's very handy for wiping the slime off the hands. Let's get the old disgorger back. Straighten milk out a little bit. That was it. Really dived down there. I don't think it was aiming for some snags. It almost straightened it. That's a good sign. First fish a chub. Oh, it's always been kind to me, this island. I had 4 or 5 draws on here, and it's got amongst a few fish. Let's have another chuck. Plop it right next to that tree where I had the other bite. Oh, it's really pouring down now. Mind, I don't like fishing under a brolly. I get a bit claustrophobic. I like a bit of a knot. I'll have a try at that. It just moved a bit then, I thought it was a fish. Maybe it's a fish, it's not a very big one. That's probably a dace. Loads of dace in here. Oh, it's nice, a skimmer. Crikey. I don't get many of them here. They dropped my reel in the river. Try and get another one. It's getting knocked about all the time, that bait is. There's plenty of fish in there. Just wait until we get a positive. Yeah, that's another chub. I thought he'd gone a bit quiet. Really tearing for that far back. There's a lot of roots down there, and these fish want to get in there. Just let him get to have his fussy out, and we'll get him in the middle of the river. It's not particularly a big fish. They can lay doggo right the way across the river, and then when they get under your feet they go crazy, and that's the most dangerous part because they can crack you off. Oh, this rod's really nice for this kind of fishing. It's come down river, this one, not the one. It's quite amazing how much this pound bottom will take. If you've got a carbon rod on, sometimes it'll just compress too quickly and then you'd snap off. That's a better fish. It's not ready for the net yet though. Come on. It's like a horseshoe. This rod is. Alright, to the pan. Oh, straight in there. Thought it was a snag and he swum in. That's a bit bigger, that one is. Very slim fish. Yeah. I like to use the disc gorge, especially on a barbed hook. That's it. Just put that down there. There we go. It's a little bit bigger than the other one. Nice fish though. Look at the mouth on it. Looks funnier size to when you're hooking a big mouth like that. Let's pop him in the water. That's 2. 20 more to go. I hope. Bit of a taffel on here. Right. Back in action. Let's see if we can get another one. Nice smooth cast right under the tree. Getting bite straight away, but I think that must have been a dace. Maggots are okay. And get back in. When there is a chub shoal moving about, it's important to try and get them out as quick as you can. They'll soon move off into another angler's peg. It's looking good up to yet. I knew the island wouldn't let me down. Gone quiet again now. I'm getting a lot of dace bites on the drop. Definitely shortening that tail's helped me get amongst them chub. That could be one of two things. Either the chub moved in and scared the dace away, or a dace has intercepted the bait on the drop and marked the maggot and the chub don't want to know. Or there could be no fish there. I hope it's not the latter. I've caught a few dace, but if I was going to fish for dace on this peg today, I'd be tempted to fish the waggler and spray a lot of maggots in and try and get them up in the water. But you're talking about using a lot of bait. You could use anything up to 6 pints in a 5-hour competition. I've been fishing for 2 hours now and things are going pretty well. I think I'll have a look at the length of the tail. Oh, that's a wrap. That's another chub. It's these long quiet spells in between and you don't know whether the maggot's damaged or not, but it's certainly worth leaving that one in. Temptation is to just keep bringing the feeder back out again and find out your maggots aren't damaged. Sometimes you have to wait for the chub. It's about the same size as the other. I don't feel a big fish. They're all about the same size, like peas in a pod. There's some massive fish on this Twyford length. I can remember one angler, I think it was Dennis Dutton, drew an ex-peg to me. They had 5 chub for nearly £14. The best two went 4.12 and 4.13. That was a few years ago, but you're lucky to get one about £3 now. I tend to go in cycles though, these fish, all species. That's not a big fish. It's coming up. As soon as you can get their heads above the water, they're easy, but while he's rooting around looking for a snag, That's bigger than I thought. Get your mouth open. That's it. Once he's got his mouth open, they just come in like babies. Straight in the net. It's amazing when they see that dark net, they think it's a snag and try and dive in it. Yeah, that's nice. It's very lean. Perhaps they just finished spawning. It'll do. Right. I mentioned why I shortened the hook length earlier on, and that was deliberately to get through the days and get the bait down quickly to the bottom. In a situation where the bites are tailing off, we can alter the length of the tail all the time during the course of a 5-hour match, even up to maybe 5 or 6 times to find the optimum length. And that's the art to swim feeder fishing, really, finding what length tail the fish want to take it on the day. It depends on the depth you're fishing and the fish that you're fishing for. But if a chub are really having a go and there's a good shoal in front of you, they'll attack it at any depth. I've watched chub in a fish tank and the other fish just don't stand a chance once they're feeding. If it was to die off now and I've stopped getting bites, then I might lengthen the tail up to twice as long as that, maybe 2 foot, 2.5 foot. And in cold weather, especially in winter, if there's anything up to 6 foot tails, even longer, I've seen some anglers using 8 foot tails, and this is just to help get a bite. The fish are shying away from the swim feeder, and it seems to frighten them, so they hold back a long way. But this length tail seems to be working okay today. Pop a couple of maggots on and see what happens. The nice thing about that link on the feeder is it stops the cap blowing up. Have it on a conventional way, it can sometimes override that bead and slide right up the line. Not making a difference to the fishing, but it's just time lost. It's a nuisance factor more than anything. And as it's coming through the centre, that makes the feeder come through the water perfectly. There's a lot less resistance when it's like that. There's one thing I've not mentioned, and when you're casting a swim feeder out, especially on heavy feeders, if you're not careful you get what's called a wrap round on the quiver tip. The line loops around the top, and if you don't check it out, it can sometimes cause a crack off. That's when you cast out, the line goes really tight around the top ring and it breaks your main line. So a little trick that I've developed is just to pull the swim feeder through the runners. Then you know that it's clear and it's not got a wrap round. If it has got a wrap round, the quiver tip will tend to curl up at the end. Now a lot of people have broke off. Normally happens when you're catching fish. As soon as it's hit the water, they're straight on it. I missed that one. The thing I'm going to try and do is I'm going to put a little bit of weight on the feeder to see if I can get through these tiny dace on the top. It's a big problem in summer on the Avon with dace. And you can feed up to 6 pints of maggots and still not get through them. Try and feed them away to get down to the bigger fish, but it doesn't always work. I've seen them boiling literally from one side of the river to the other as they spray the maggots in with a catapult. And I think that's what's happening today. I'm not getting a tremendous amount of feed out with this feeder, but as the maggot is hitting the surface, the dace are intercepting it all the way down. By the time it gets to the bottom, it's shredded. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a small strap lead on. It's about ½ an ounce in weight. Just clip him into the holes in the feed, and they're great, these little strap leads. There's about 4 or 5 sizes. Ideal for getting it right in the river, when I mentioned before about getting the balance so that it's just holding on the bottom. But we're not trying to do this now. What I'm trying to do is get the feeder through the tiny dace on the top and hopefully get some bigger fish underneath. It's frustrating enough trying to catch him on the waggle of it. Pulling my hair out. I'm missing loads of bites. Probably hitting 1 in 5, and arguably about right for me. Right, so that feeder's gone straight to the bottom now, and I'm going to leave it. Got one first chucking point axle on, so that seems to be the method. There's some big dace in here, and that's a beauty. Just swing him out. If it had been in a match, I'd have panned that one. Lovely fish. I've had £16 in one competition here a couple of 3 years ago, and I tried catching them on the waggler. And the water was erupting on the top, and I fed the maggots closer in by hand. Get out there. I noticed I could see the dace coming up in the water, intercepting the maggots. Set a small pole up, and there was just coming up. I could see him eating the maggots. Now this is much better now. I'm just leaving it a while, make sure the fish, they're hooking themselves against the weight of the feeder, and it's more or less working on the bolt rig principle. One of the things that you do pick up over the years of fishing on the Swimfeeder is reading the different bites that you get. Chub bites are normally quite ferocious, especially in summer when they're moving freely in the water, and you can see these quite clearly. Sometimes you get a drop back bite, and that's when the chub picks the bait up and then lifts the weight of the feeder up, and that takes all the bow out of the line and drops it completely back. Barboard do this as well, and that's why I stressed earlier on, when you do actually pick the rod up to strike, it's not a strike as such, it's just a nice smooth action. Otherwise, if the fish is running towards you or running the other way, it could quite easily crack off. That was a chub bite. Felt like it were snagged up, this one. Definitely in something. Normally what I do when they're in a snag is just to put the rod top there of it and just see if it moves out. It's still hooked. That's it, it's come out now. If you try and bully them too hard when they've gone into a snag, then all they do is just swim around it and break your hook length. I've been lucky on that one. It's gone right downstream. The weather's getting a bit iffy now. It's got really cold, and that wind's changed right round when we started. It was blowing up gate and rolling it, and it's coming down at us now. And the rain's held off. There we go. Come on, son. Get your head up. There we go. Once you get the mouths out of the water, then the job's over. You can't see where the snags are anymore then. Let's put that in the rest. Again, another chub about the same size. Had no big ones up to yet. Where's my discord jig on? There we are. Get that off. Very sleek fish, very powerful. I don't know how to get to the snags. Let's pop in the water. I'm putting double maggot on. When you're putting a lot of bait in on the feeder, getting through this small feeder, I'm getting through probably a pint and a half in an hour. Definitely keen, leaving the feeder in the water a bit longer, letting the bite develop, almost hooking themselves against the lead. Just check out the feeder again, make sure it's running through alright. It's a right lump when it goes in. Doesn't sound right, but I seem to want it. Right, I'll turn my eyes away from that. I'd probably be bending round up. I want some more bait. Oh, that's not the right one. Put that one out of the way. I'm glad it stopped raining now. Let's top up with bait. Yeah. Put that out of the way. Well, that's rattling away there now. Quite merrily. Them dates are really having a chill. Look at that, it's like a Jack Russell. It's not like a Jack Russell, it's that go. You can actually, when they're hitting the feed like that, you can just wind it in a little bit more and get another bite. But what might be an idea is if say I stepped up the feed, or alternatively I could decrease the feed. I can even take the swim feeder off and put a bomb on and cast amongst it. Maybe there's too much going in. It's a case of sorting it all out. It's not an easy method as some people portray, and I think people are blinded by the method feeder called splodger and chucking a pig. In actual fact, it's quite technical, and what we talked about before with all the different lengths of tail and the weights, you can see it's not just a case of chuck and chance. And I can assure you that some of the top anglers on the circuit these days are no mugs. Let's see if I can catch one this time. Put him in the rest. Just fold my arms a bit. Oh! Took my eye off that for a second and it went round. Crikey. There's another chub. I don't know if it snagged me or not again. I was a bit late on that bite. I just took my eye off it. I was a bit distracted. I'm getting a lot of these little dace rattles. As you often do, go for a drink of tea or turn around to fetch something from behind you and the tip was round. Well, that one's stuck in something. Hold on. Hold on. That's it. It's off. I've been lucky today. That's two I've had in a snag and they've both come out quite easily. Wish that happened in every match. It's not a big fish, but as long as you're catching the odd net fish amongst a bag of small fish, it breaks the day up a bit. It's gone downstream a bit. This is hump the root out. There he goes. And you see he's been in a bit of weed. Just give him a minute. Normally when they get that blanket of weed in front of the nose, it just stops them in the tracks. He's had enough now. There we go. That's a little bit smaller than the others I've had. Nevertheless, a nice fish. That's what he was after, trying to get amongst that. There you go. Put that down there. That's another nice fish. I hope I get a dozen of them next weekend. Well, things are looking up. These maggots seem to have shriveled up. It's not that warm, but they've shrunk a little bit. I'll give it another go. And just when the caps come off there, I'll just plug a bit of groundbait in the bottom of that. This is a method that worked ever so well on the Trent when the caster and groundbait faded out. I just used to skim the feeder with a little bit of groundbait and caster on the top and fill it with either caster and em or put maggots in. No problem. I don't think the fish are too worried today. There's enough dace down there to eat all that groundbait. Yeah, straight on it. I'm probably pecking the groundbait out of the feeder now. No, missed that one. Alright. I haven't. I thought I'd lost that. Well, I'm going to net this one. Because last time I tried it, it fell off. There you go. I was fishing a match, I can assure you I'd be netting a lot smaller fish than this. Little dace. And pop him in the net. Great stuff. Wonder where they're going. Cap it off with a ground bait. As the noise of the jets fades away, I'll chuck in. Brill. It's getting a bit nippy now. The fish seem to have gone a bit off the feed. It would be nice to catch another chub before I pack it in. But I won't be too disappointed if I don't. I've had a good day's fishing. I've got some nice chub, some good quality dace. Well, that's not the best method really, feeder fishing for dace. If you're going to go for them in great number, you'd probably fish the waggler or the stick or even the pole. Not the worst day though. I've had a lot worse days, especially in winter time. The bites I've had today probably last me 7 or 8 matches. I just want to recap on a few things before we get the fish out of the net. Remembering about the hooks, start off on a smallish hook, maybe a 20s or a 22, 1 pound bottoms or 1/7. Unless you know the peg very well and it's snaggy, in which case you can step the line up and fish a heavier hook. I did forget to mention that the hook I use on snaggy pegs, when there's a chance of losing better quality fish, I use a super spade made by Peter Drennan. It's got to be one of the strongest hooks that are available on the market. If you can get away with one of them and the fish are feeding strong, then you're a winner. The diameter of the lines on the hook length is very important, and I always mic the line up with a micrometer just to make sure that it is what it says on the spool. Feeder fishing is not just a chuck and chance method, it's a skillful method, and given the time and the effort you can learn to catch more fish. There we go. It's what the doctor ordered. It's like the fish gods are being kind to me today. It's only wishful thinking. It's another chub. Not too big, but I still give a good scrap in the little ones. Come on, my son. I'll let him have a little nose round. He's just looking for snags, that's all they do, chub. There we go. Come here. There's only a baby. There we go. That'll do me today. Pop him in the net. I'll pop him in the net and then we'll have a look at the other ones. Go on, Mark. Let's have a look what we've got. Well, I've had a great day's fishing and I hope to see you soon.